The Samsung S90H looks familiar at first glance, but a few key updates make it very different from last year's model. This year, Samsung has switched from a qd-oled panel to a WOLED panel, and they've also added their divisive matte coating. That's a unique combination that's had quite an impact on bright room performance. This is the first Samsung OLED we've reviewed this year, and we'll also be reviewing the flagship S95H, as well as OLEDs and TVs from all the big brands. Be sure to subscribe if you want to stay up to date on the latest TV tech in 2026. The Samsung S90H sits above the more affordable Samsung S85H and just below the flagship S95H in their OLED lineup. It's available in a wide range of sizes, anything from a small 42-inch to a large 83-inch. The 42-inch model likely isn't as bright as the larger sizes, and that's typically the case with these smaller OLEDs. All sizes use a standard WOLED panel except for the 48 and 77-inch models, which use LG's primary RGB tandem panel. We bought and tested the 65-inch, but our results also apply to the 55-inch and 83-inch models. If you want to see us test the 48 or 77-inch models to see how they stack up against the other sizes, let us know in the comments. Like any OLED, this TV displays those impressive inky blacks in a dark room with no haloing around highlights or subtitles. You also get near instant response times, resulting in unrivaled motion clarity. And like any OLED, it has a wide viewing angle. What really makes this TV unique is its combination of a WOLED panel and a matte screen coating. So let's focus on bright room performance for now. The S90H isn't the brightest OLED on the market, but it still has very good peak brightness in SDR. It certainly doesn't look dim, but if it had used a glossy screen coating, it wouldn't be quite bright enough to handle strong glare, especially with direct light sources. The trick it has up its sleeve is its matte screen coating. You could shine a flashlight directly at the screen, and you'd barely be able to make out its reflection. Glare is essentially a non-issue with this model, even in the brightest rooms. Samsung has utilized matte coatings in the past for the 2024 and 2025 versions of the S95. This coating has always done a fantastic job at handling reflections, but the qd-oled panel found in the S95 always caused raised blacks in a bright room. There's a common misconception that the matte screen coating on that model was the main reason blacks were so raised in a room with ambient lighting, but that's not really the case. Although matte coatings do tend to spread reflections across more of the screen, which can in turn cause slightly more elevated blacks than a glossy coating, the bigger issue is that qd-oleds lack a polarizer. Even last year's S90F, which uses a combination of a qd-oled panel and a glossy screen coating, has the same amount of black level rays as the S95F. So, how did the S90H's black levels look in a bright room? Fortunately, they're much deeper than they were on last year's S90F. You do lose those inky blacks that you get in a dark room, but they avoid looking like charcoal, and they don't have the purple tint that qd-oleds suffer from. Blacks aren't as deep in a bright room as they are on this TV's biggest competitor, the LG C6, but reflections are a bigger issue on that model. This is the only OLED currently on the market that retains deep blacks and has a matte coating, so it does offer something unique. Ambient lighting does cause darker colors to lose some perceived saturation, but it's not a massive drop-off, and brighter colors remain mostly unaffected. All in all, the TV has solid image quality in a bright room. Naturally, the TV looks its best in a dark room. The TV's color volume in SDR is solid, and it covers nearly the entirety of the DCI-P3 color space. It only covers about 70% of the super wide VT 2020 color space here, but that is the case for any standard WOLED, so it's not surprising. In HDR, it covers 88% of the DCI-P3 color space at 1000 nits. This is quite good, but since it relies on a white subpixel to boost brightness, bright colors can look a bit washed out, especially when compared to the older qd-oled versions of the S90. SDR color accuracy is good, but it's not perfect. The gamma is a bit off from 2.2, the color temperature is a bit too warm, and whites and cyans look a bit too green. These aren't major inaccuracies, but it might bother some enthusiasts. It's a similar story in HDR, but here the image looks a bit too cool. There are also inaccuracies across the board with many colors. Blues are off the mark, and reds are pretty undersaturated. You can always get the TV calibrated if you want the most accurate image possible, but the TV was a bit stubborn for us with certain adjustments in HDR, so we couldn't completely fix all the inaccuracies. Just something to keep in mind if you plan on calibrating your TV. We already covered SDR brightness, so let's look at some HDR numbers. It peaks at just under 1500 nits with a 2% window and 800 nits with a 25% window. With a 100% window, it hits around 275 nits. But full screen brightness is always a limitation of OLEDs because of ABL, so this is nothing out of the ordinary. Highlights do pop out well enough for impactful HDR, but these test slide measurements don't necessarily translate to all real scenes. With our hallway lights scene, the TV is quite a bit dimmer than the LG C6, which uses an identical panel. Our landscape pool scene should peak at around 300 nits, but here it's only hitting 136, which is also quite a bit dimmer than the C6. If you need more brightness, you can always set HDR tone mapping to active, which makes the image brighter but less accurate. Fortunately, the TV is a bit brighter in its dedicated gaming mode, so you don't lose any brightness when you want the best possible gaming performance. The TV does a very solid job displaying HDR content at the brightness level intended by filmmakers, but it's not perfect. Near blacks are slightly raised, but aside from that, it mostly undertracks throughout midtones and highlights. It's not like HDR content looks significantly dimmer than intended, but if you care about brightness accuracy, that slight undertracking might bother you. The S90H is a Samsung TV, so it doesn't support Dolby Vision. It does support the similar HDR10 Plus, which is supported by some streaming services, but still isn't quite as common as Dolby's HDR format, especially on physical media. Fortunately, Samsung didn't skimp out on gaming features here. It supports 165 Hz at 4K on all 4 of its HDMI 2.1 ports. It also supports FreeSync and HDMI 4 VRR, so console owners are covered. It's even NVIDIA certified, so you shouldn't have any issues with G-Sync on your PC. We noticed that this year's version of the Tizen OS was snappier than previous versions, which was a nice surprise. It's still not as smooth as a dedicated streaming device like an Apple TV, but most people will be pleased with the Smart OS. You also get features like Samsung's version of Picture-in-Picture called Multiview. Plus, it's also got AI Soccer Sound Controller, a feature which lets you control the volume level of commentators and background noise separately. We didn't spend too long exploring this feature, but it did seem to work as intended when we did. If you wish we explored smart features more in depth, let us know. The S90H's biggest competitor is the LG C6. Both TVs use the same panel and have very similar features, but there are differences. The matte screen coating on the S90H makes it a better choice for bright rooms. However, the C6 offers better brightness in HDR, supports Dolby Vision, and has better processing. If you mostly watch TV in a dark or moderately lit room, the C6 is going to be the better option. If you typically use your TV in a bright room, the S90H takes the cake. The Samsung S90H is a versatile OLED that performs well in both dark and bright environments. Some people may be disappointed by Samsung's decision to use a less colorful WOLED panel in this model instead of the qd-oled panel of previous versions. However, Samsung seems focused on making sure their OLEDs perform well in bright rooms. And this TV certainly fits that bill.